sorry.
Hello everyone. Hi, my name is Daniele. I'm an Android freelancer and Google developer expert. And today I'm going to talk to you about a new SDK that Google just released. Well, almost. We're going to see it still in preview. That can help us develop apps that can solve some maybe edge cases, but I think some cases that you will recognize yourself as users. So before jumping into this description of this new SDK, let's try to see what are the problems or the cases that it's trying to solve. Have you ever dealt with this kind of UI? When on your TV you are trying to search for something using that beautiful input device that is the on-screen keyboard, or trying to search for a TV show using just the remote. Kind of painful, isn't it? It would be way better if you could just use the keyboard that you are used to on your phone to actually input something on your TV. Or we all know how good apps there are out there that allow us to read books, articles, news on our phone. But to be fair, if we could switch when we go back home from a small screen of a phone to a bigger tablet screen, that would make our reading experience way, way better. Or did it ever happen to you that, I don't know, you were playing a video game on your fridge, and then you realized what I'm doing here, I could better go on my sofa and play with my console. Maybe if only there was a streaming service that allowed me to switch between one device and seamlessly connect on the other one. So all these cases can be solved in a different way, in a lot of different ways. We could, of course, check using zeroconf, for example, for devices in the local network. We could create something ad hoc using Bluetooth, but we know that the Bluetooth APIs, they are a pain to work with. We could use a lot of technologies. This new SDK, the Cross Device SDK, help us creating an abstraction over all these technologies, and we will see the API that it's providing, they're going to make our life as developers way, way easier. So this new SDK is built on top of Play services, and it uses, we will see later, some UI that is similar to the nearby share. And by doing so, it's also using a lot of physical technologies, low-level technologies that are below. So, for example, it's using both Bluetooth and Bluetooth Low Energy, Wi-Fi, and also ultra-wideband in order to detect what are the other devices nearby, connect, share data in an encrypted way, all this in a way, way simpler manner compared to what we are used to with other technologies. This is not the first SDK that allows us to create applications that are working with multiple devices. There are some other which are more specific to some other use cases. For example, the Cast SDK is the one that allows us to easily stream video, or also music, of course, from a main device to a TV or a smart speaker. Then we have, for example, media sessions to seamlessly continue playback on different devices and in background. Block Store allows us to basically get credentials from the ones stored in the Google account of the user without having them to type them every time. And finally, the companion device manager, which allows us to easily pair, connect, and manage all the physical devices, physical accessories that our phone can connect to, for example, headphones, activity tracker, all these kind of devices. This new SDK is a bit more flexible, meaning that it allows us to decide what we want to share among devices in order to create the best user experience for our users, depending on the case. Something worth notice is that it's still in a developer preview. It's early stage. and this comes with several limitations. So Google has big plans apparently for this SDK, but it's not the time yet. So at the moment, it's only for tablets and phones. While in the future, and this I think is something really promising, it will be able to work also with other devices like TVs, watches, cars, fridges maybe, I don't know. But still, it would be a great improvement in the future. Also, Google is planning to release it for several other OS. At the moment, it's just for Android, but in the future, it will be available also for iOS, Chrome OS, Windows, Mac. They announced it. They didn't announce any date, but it's in the pipeline. Then, at the moment, we are just limited to 2 devices, which can be okay for personal use cases, for example, stopping doing a task on one device and switching to another better suited device. But as we will see later, there are some cases that are pretty interesting when considering more people in the same, for the same task, let's say. Again, it's a preview, so expect the APIs to be changing in the future. And of course, shouldn't be needed to mention, but it's not ready for production. So should play with it, but again, I wouldn't commit right now on building a full application just around this new SDK. Okay, so let's see what are the main components of this SDK. There are 3 main building blocks, let's say. First one being the device discovery, which is, as you can expect from the name, the one that allows us to discover and to let us, our user know which are the other devices that are nearby. Once the user selects which devices to connect on, then the second building block comes to action, which is the actual secure connection. As the name suggests, all the connection between the devices is encrypted and is managed by us, by Play services for us. So we don't need to worry about encryption, security, and stuff. Everything is done under the hood for us. The third one, and maybe more interesting building block, is built on top of the first 2. With Sessions API, we will see that it is going to be very, very easy to transfer the current state of an application between different devices, and also to have multiple devices to collaborate on the same thing. Okay, let's start with the first one. Well, the device discovery API is the one that also provides basically the system UI that is managed by this SDK. But actually, it is not used by only this SDK. As you can see, I don't know if you ever tried Nearby Share, but basically the system UI is exactly the same. If you now enable in the system settings of your Pixel phone, I don't know if it's available for others, but I think so in the last version of Android. If you enable Nearby Share, you can easily share a file among nearby devices without worrying to be in the same network or to be from the same user. Play services take care of everything, and they let populate this panel with all the devices nearby. For our case, let's see how we can use it in our application. We always start just taking an instance of this discovery application and then registering for connection callback. This callback is the one that is going to notify us when the user picks, literally from the panel that we just saw, one or more devices. Then we actually launch this picker, and here it's interesting because we need to specify, well, let's go with the easiest parameter is the reason, which is the message that the user is going to actually read. An action, which is the one that we are going to register in our application manifest, and that is going to be automatically opened in the secondary selected device. At the moment, the application needs to be installed on both devices to work. But in the future, Google is going to integrate it with the Play Store so that if the application is not installed and it's available on the Play Store, a pop-up can be triggered or a notification, still not clear, on the secondary device to inform the user to install the app and continue the session there. And then there are filters. These are still a work in progress, but basically, before jumping into filters, something worth notice is that this launch device picker method is a suspend function, which, like most of the methods, the blocking methods of this SDK, requires to be invoked from a coroutine scope, so just worth keeping in mind. I was talking about filters, and there are at the moment two types of filters. The first one is the relationship one, which can be only devices that are signed in with the same Google account as the current one, or unspecified, which is basically show me all the devices nearby. These are already working. But the most interesting one, in my opinion, are the feature filters. And these ones are unfortunately not yet implemented in the current state of the SDK, but they will allow us in the future to only select and show to the user devices that support specific features. For example, imagine only show me a device that has a large screen, or that is a watch, or again, that has a camera, because I want to perform some specific tasks. So this one can allow us to show the user only a relevant one to basically reduce the confusion on which one to pick, in case there is the need. So in the receiving device, as I mentioned, the activity that is registered with the action that we described is invoked, and we are going to receive a new intent. Once we have this intent, again, it's better to check for the action, and we are going to get the participant, meaning a reference of the originating device, from the Discovery API. And once we have this instance, we have a participant both in the receiving phone and in the sending phone, the primary phone. And then with those one, we can start the connection. That one is done through the Secure Connection API, which is, again, the second building blocks that we saw before. Again, once we have a participant, we can simply open a connection. And here you can see we can just register for some connection errors. We keep a reference of the connected device, because this is what we are going to use later to communicate. And we can register a receiver for that device, so that once we receive some data from that one, we are going to get notified, we can update the UI, basically do all our logic. And to send, it's simply as simple as calling the send method, using any byte array, which can be the representation of what we want to share. On the receiving device, is very similar. We accept the connection, and once we get once we accept the connection, we can register the same receiver that we saw before. So we have two methods, basically. When we receive a new message, and then when the connection is closed. That's simple. So with this one already, it abstracts all the difficulties of managing a secure connection. We are, of course, going to have callbacks for errors, but this one is super simple. Then, the most interesting part. Sessions API is the one that is built on top of the other two. And let's see one simple use case for this API. Let's say we want to transfer a session, meaning that I was reading an article on my phone, and I want to continue reading on a tablet, because the screen is better, is more suited for reading, I don't know. The first device is going to create a session object. And using the system UI to select which is going to be the device, the target device, I can propagate that session to the other device, and at this point, the user is going to continue on that one, and the first one can basically display, okay, go and use the second one, or just close the application. You can basically force the user or induce the user to use the secondary one. To do it is as simple as creating an instance of the Sessions API, create a session ID with a given name, and then using the transfer session method. As you can see here, we are going to have some similar similar parameters to what we saw before. So we have the same start component with an action and a reason. Again, same as the ones that we saw before, so the ones that are used to start a new application in the secondary device. Same filters, so again, here we can filter for some specific capabilities, and a callback. This callback is the one that is going to be used to understand when a new device actually accepted the connection. And the most interesting part is the send message. Send is the same method that we saw before, but in this case, when we want to transfer a session, the idea here is that the parameter, this byte array, is going to be the representation of our session. So let's say that you are reading an article. What you want to share maybe is the URL of that article and the percentage that has been read, like the current position, so that the user can seemingly continue reading from the same position. If it's a game, well, that one, what you are going to send is the game representation of that session, that playing session. So, I don't know, the score, the player location, the enemy's location, everything. So this one is totally application dependent, but the SDK takes away a lot of the weight to need to understand and to handle all of this. Again, of course, once we have the remote connection, we can listen to any messages from the secondary device. We have a callback from the SDK if the session was transferred correctly or if there was an error. So again, at this point, we can also close the first application in the first device, and then the user can continue in the second one. In order to do so, the second one, of course, the application needs to accept it. With that one is as simple as, again, getting an intent, because as we saw before, the application is going to starting with that action that we saw before. Get to the receiving section, and then register a receiver. With that one, we can get the byte array representation of the session, transform it to our application model, and restore the state. Simple as that. There is, however, another use case for this sessions API, which is actually, there is also a callback that you can register, which is just for errors, but of course. The more interesting case, in my opinion, is when we do not only want to transfer a session, but we want to share it among multiple devices. And in this case, for example, let's imagine we are ordering dinner. I have friends at home. We want to decide what to order. So instead of passing around a menu, passing around a tablet with the Just Eat app and to select what to order, we can have a single session, which is created by the first phone, the one that I own. I'm going to select all the other friends' devices. And those devices, they are going to receive a secondary session. This session is going to be linked with the primary one, and you have to implement, of course, the logic in your application. But basically, the main thing to consider here is that my phone, the primary one, is going to be the source of truth. So it's duty to inform the other devices that something changed in the primary session. And once it's changed, the other ones, they're going to receive an update. So again, this is a bidirectional communication. So for example, if a friend of mine selects something to order, that one is going to propagate it to the primary device, and that one is going to notify all the participants of this session. Let's see how it works. Again, share session is the same thing as we saw before for transfer session. The only thing that changes is, as you can guess, the name of the method. But the rest of the parameters, they're the same. Same filters, same action. Well, you change the string, but the idea is always the same. What is really changing is the callback that you are having as a primary device. Because in that case, you are interested and you can show a different UI depending on a lot of things. So, for example, the first method, the share initiated, is the one that can basically notify your app, there are not a lot of devices around. So for example, I need devices that are capable to do some things, that are needed to have some different capabilities. So here you can do nothing, or maybe you can apply some logic, like I needed to have at least 2 more devices. On participant joined is the main method that we are interested in this callback, because it's the method that is invoked every time a secondary device connects, and at this point we should send them the current state of the session. Remember, the primary one is the source of truth, so when a new device joins, we need to share the current state, and of course we need to also keep a reference of their connection, so that as soon as there is a new update, we can propagate that too. And then we have the other callbacks that you can imagine. So for example, when a device disconnects, when we are closing the whole session, or where there are some failures. On the receiving side, it's similar as what we saw before. We are going to receive a new intent. We get, in this case, we are just getting a secondary session. And with this one, from this one, we are going to getting a remote connection. And that connection is the one that we are going to use to register a callback and to send data, like as we saw before. And here, again, we can just register another callback for errors, or for when the session is closed. So, to summarize, this SDK allows us to implement both some personal use cases, when the user is basically performing or continuing doing a task from one device to another one that is better suited to what they are actually doing. But also, I think it's really interesting, it allows us to create easily some communal cases without the use of a backend, without the use of lower level technologies. It's really simple to have some collaboration among users of your app in a simple way. But again, remember, it's still in preview, so can change a lot in the future. Okay, I'm gonna leave here some links, but I'm pretty sure the slides are gonna be shared later, about the official documentation, some samples, and more interestingly, the SDK is built on top of Play services, but it's totally open source. So this is pretty good because you can see what's happening under the hood, at least in that part, and you can check what's the current state. So with this, I thank you for attending here, and both, if you have questions, please go ahead, but otherwise, I'd be curious to hear if you have any use cases that you would cover with this SDK. Thank you.